raise 'em high. That is such a catchy tune. Now, it's sad the circumstances in which that tune is sang in this film that we're reviewing tonight, but I think I'm always going to remember that tune. Tonight's movie review is of a classic, one of my all-time favorite movies. Tonight's review is of I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, and it came out in 1932, and this was a Warner Brothers picture, an early one. It came sort of controversial to the people of the time when it came out. It was directed by Mervyn LeRoy. A lot of people would know him for directing The Wizard of Oz. It's kind of interesting that he would direct such a dark film such as our movie tonight and then go on to make A Wizard of Oz. Now, this movie stars the great Paul Muni. It's interesting because Paul Muni wasn't in too many movies, but I think at some point I'm definitely going to have reviewed all of his movies here. But I've been sort of holding back on that on some of his movies because I really want a biography on him before I dive too deep into all his movies. But I've been dying to review another Paul Muni movie. And it also has Glenda Farrell and also Preston Foster, interestingly enough, because we watched him in our last review. And this movie is based on real life events. It's based on the life of a man named Robert E. Burns. He was on a chain gang in Georgia, and he had escaped from the chain gang, just like in this story. Paul Muni, he basically plays his character in this movie, but in this movie, his name is changed to James Allen. And this movie is basically it's a glimpse into what chain gang life was like in the Deep South when this movie came out, so in the 30s. And it's interesting because that stuff was still going on at the time this movie came out. It didn't specifically say that this film was based on Georgia and Georgia chain gang life for prisoners, but it's pretty clear that the director Mervyn LeRoy and Warner Brothers, Jack Warner, they were sort of modeling the film after the Georgia prison chain gang life. And it's interesting because since it was still going on, they knew exactly how to build the set. They knew exactly, they had talked to people, but I'm sort of getting into the history a little too much on the movie. So the plot of this movie it's interesting. Paul Muni, he plays James Allen, and he comes back home from the war, from World War I, and his family, they really want him to return back to normal life. They want him to go back to the company life, be a businessman. He doesn't want that. He wants to sort of break away from his day-to-day routine life. He's a changed man. The war changed a lot of people, and he wants to work with his hands. He wants to be an architect or just build bridges, build something. He wants to be a construction worker, which is admirable. And so finally his family says, okay, you go do what you want to do. And so he travels around the country, very poor. He has no money. I love how they show how he goes from state to state. There's a lot of trains in this, a lot of scenes of like being on steamboats, and it really sort of gives us an interesting glimpse into what life was like in the 30s. So he eventually ends up in like a small town. He's in a diner, and he meets this fellow, this nice, kind fellow, played by Preston Foster. And he says, hey, come with me. I'll get you some food. So they go to this diner, and they order these hamburgers, and I'll note the hamburgers look really good on the grill. They really do. And Preston Foster, he says, basically, this is a holdup to the owner of the diner, and he forces Paul Muni to go get the food, to go get the money from the register. And Paul Muni, he has no idea what's going on. He's being forced to do it by Preston Foster. Um, and so as Preston Foster's character runs out with the money, he gets shot instantly and killed by the police. And Paul Muni, James Allen, he gets spooked and he tries to run away. And of course, the cops catch up to him right away. And he basically looks guilty. And that brings us to the Chain Gang. Now, Warner Brothers was, I always say this, was just amazing at building sets. I think Warner Brothers mastered building sets, and in my opinion, they were better than all the other studios at doing that. And this movie, of course, backed by Jack Warner, is no exception to that, because the set in which we see the living conditions of the people on the Chain Gang in the South, their living quarters is awful. We see them all come in on a truck on this dirt road. It's filthy, and their living quarters are disgusting. We see how they're all chained to each other. There's a lot of up close camera angles of the chains, how they're all connected to each other. When they take a bath, they all put their hands in the same big bucket of water. So there's just so much gross stuff in the bucket. We see the awful food that they eat. It's like grease and fat from meat. It's disgusting. But the director, Mervyn LeRoy, really captured how awful life was for these people. They're exhausted. And of course, Paul Muni, because we kind of see James Allen's first experience there. At first, he's kind of looking around, seeing what his life is going to be like. And then we're taken to the rock quarry, where all the prisoners on the Chain Gang are forced to raise them high and basically just with sledgehammers hit the rocks down into pieces. And if you just look around at the cast, they all look, some of them are so skinny they look like Holocaust people. They look exhausted, and apparently they really did film this in the extremely hot California sun in an actual rock quarry. And it's just the fact that they have to do this every single day for years and years, it's miserable. And when they go back to the living quarters, they go back on those trucks chained to each other on that dirt road. They're filthy, they're exhausted, they eat awful food, they pass out in bed, they're forced awake to do it all over again the next day. And one important scene to note is when Paul Muni, James Allen, sticks up for someone. He basically says something about the warden who wants to beat a man, who wants to whip him with a belt or leather strap. And when James Allen is brought to be whipped himself, we don't actually see the whipping occur. We just hear whoosh, 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 and we see the faces of the other prisoners as it's happening. And of course, we can't hear Paul Muni because he's a tough guy. But this scene was sort of ahead of its time. We've seen scenes like this where we don't see the pain, but we hear what's going on, and it sort of plays on our imagination more. We see that in movies and TV all the time now, but that may have been one of the first instances where that happened, and Mervyn LeRoy was really a genius for doing it that way, because if we had seen it, it wouldn't have had as much of an impact, I think. It's a very powerful scene. So then, eventually, Paul Muni, he escapes from the Chain Gang, and it's so cool how he does it. He has the help of this really big black man who, it's obviously greased him up to make him look extra strong, and obviously it's really hot out in the sun at this point too, and he has the help from this really big strong black man. He hits with a sledgehammer his chain and it's painful to watch because Paul Muni was just excellent with acting with his eyes and his face and the pain that he was feeling when he was getting hit. And he loosens it enough to the point where he's later able to escape. Now, I won't go too in depth on the actual first escape, but so he escapes, and the escape scenes are awesome. I will say that. There's 2 escape scenes in the movie. In fact, I had only remembered there being 1, but there's 2. But he escapes, and he goes on to the north, to a big city, and he works for a construction company, his dream. And he, it's funny, this is when he meets Glenda Farrell's character, Marie. And he's a good-looking guy, and he says, how much is rent going to be here? And she's obviously checking him out, and she's like, for you, I'll make the rent real low for you. And obviously they're thinking, he's thinking maybe I can use this advantage to get a good deal on rent. And I love how they show months also, or years and months on the calendar. Every time it changes, you see a sledgehammer, the calendar date go down. And also when he's sort of rising up at this company, I believe they do it by showing that his work punch card, it keeps changing. We keep seeing his pay raise and his title change, which all was really clever, to the point where he's a powerful man at this company. He's sort of the American dream. He rises from nothing and becomes this really well-known, powerful architect. And Marie, she's sort of this trampy character. He's like, Marie, it's been good. But I just need a bigger place. It's been good between us. And she says, oh no, you're not going anywhere. And he says, Marie, we know what this was. And this is so ahead of, this was pre-code, because it's inferring that, we've been sleeping together. We know that this wasn't really love. And she says, no, you're not going anywhere. I'm going with you. Or if I don't go with you, if you don't marry me, I'm telling everyone that you're an escaped chain gang convict. So basically she blackmails him into marrying her and into an awful marriage. Now, it eventually comes out, of course, because they have an awful marriage, and James is falling in love with an actual good girl. And it eventually comes out that he was an escaped convict. And this is getting towards more the end of the film, where he's, he believes that his lawyers tell him, because now he's a powerful man. It's in the papers, everything. Now it's his lawyers say, we're going to, you go back to the state. They don't say Georgia. You go back there and you're going to get a pardon. So he's like, are you sure? He goes back, and honestly, I have anxiety because I didn't remember what was going to happen. I sort of figured they were going to trick him. He goes back, and we can see the nervousness in his eyes and face when he's saying, I'm only going to be here for a month or 2. They're going to give me the pardon. I'm going to go back to my beautiful life. I'm going to marry the woman I love. But he's in a worse place now, a worse chain gang. And he's starting to go crazy. And there's a scene where he's told, they denied your pardon. You're stuck here to do your sentence. And he breaks down and is caught, and you can see him just crying and on the verge of just going madness because of the living conditions of this. It's awful. So basically he then escapes again in an awesome escape, a more action-y escape, I'll add. And I won't go into the details of that, but it's an awesome escape. Now, the final scene of this movie has always stuck with me. I watched this as a kid, and I watched it back in 2010 for the second time. This is my third time seeing the film. And I always remember the final scene when he comes out of the darkness with his big eyes and he sees his love and he says, I came to tell you, I'm paranoid. I'm always on the run. And then he says, I love you, but I can't be here. If they find me, they'll send me back. He's paranoid, and he hears a noise, and he says, his eyes get big, and he says, I have to go. I love you. And it's so spooky because he comes in, he fades into darkness saying bye, and that's how the movie ends. And that scene is so powerful. It has always stuck with me. And I read that it's rumored that was an accident, was them filming that scene like that when they were filming it, like a bulb on a light went out. And the director thought, man, we need to film it exactly like that with him fading into. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that's awesome. So I'm going to read my quick little review that I made of this back in 2010. I said, a young Paul Muni does an excellent job as an escaped convict from the chain gang. He is innocent of his crime and yet forced to serve many long years on the chain gang. Many memorable moments. Note when the black man hammers his 12 chains down. Early acting at its best. When I say early, I mean 1930s. Remember, there hadn't been talkie films out for so long in 1932. And then I say, it ends abruptly when Paul Muni sees his love one last time and hears a noise off in the distant darkness. And I gave this film back then a 3.5 stars, but for the first time, I'm going to break away from that. And since I'm kind of older, more mature, I honestly think that this film deserves a perfect 4 stars out of 4 stars. So obviously, highly recommend you all to watch this. It's one of the best 1930s movies of all time, in my opinion. I have a couple pictures to show you. So apparently they may have planned to film the actual scene of him getting whipped. You can see there the deputies or sheriffs striking him on his back with a whip. And they decided not to go with that. And I think that was the smart thing to do. So that may have been just an advertisement, or that maybe they had actually planned on showing him getting whipped. So I have another picture right here. You can see old Paul Muni working on the chain gang in the rock quarry. Some historical things interesting. Paul Muni did extensive history before filming this. He interviewed people who were actually worked on the chain gang. He wanted to know everything. He did all his own stunts, despite people saying, this is too dangerous, please don't do it. But he wanted to do it. He was known in all his films in his work career as being sort of a loner. But it's interesting because when he died, it's rumored, or I'm not sure if it's rumored or if it's fact, that Mervyn LeRoy, the director, was one of 2 people who went to his funeral. The other being his agent. Jack Warner took a huge gamble filming this because it was so controversial. He was basically exposing the chain gang life in the South, which was still very popular in the South at the time. And Georgia was furious to the point that they sued Warner Brothers and the director, and both Jack Warner and Mervyn LeRoy were essentially banned from going to Georgia. And they said, if you ever find yourselves down in Georgia, you better be careful, because basically we'll show you how we really do the chain gang life down here. And this film also led to the popularity of James Allen, or Robert E. Burns, I should say. Robert E. Burns, the actual person that this was based on. And he actually eventually received the pardon. The state that had him on the chain gang finally gave him that pardon. If you really enjoy this movie, another chain gang movie that I recommend is The Defiant Ones with Sidney Poitier. I don't know if I'll ever review that film. It's a good movie, but it's not as good as this one in my opinion. And obviously Cool Hand Luke, another movie like this, and Oh Brother Where Art Thou, but that's way beyond my scope of reviews. But I hope you enjoyed this film. Let me know what scenes in the movie really make you just love this picture, because there's so many memorable scenes. So if I missed some, please comment below, leave a like, subscribe, and thank you all for watching.